In holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. We're included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration. Let me be clear on one fundamental point. The United States fully intends to be the world's preeminent leader in protecting the global environment.
Coming up, Technocracy News. And welcome to Technocracy News and Trends. Patrick Wood here, Editor-in-Chief. And today we're going to take a very clear look at the climate change propaganda that's spread all over the world at this point. And we're going to see a contrast that we normally don't see, but I picked all three articles today to have relevance to climate change and climate warming. The first article is from CBS, Rising Sea Levels to Destroy Homes of 300 Million by 2050. This is one of those articles that is hysterical in its prediction of catastrophic results because of climate change, global warming in particular. And because temperatures are going to rise, of course, the polar ice caps are going to melt and the sea levels are going to rise along with that. And coastal communities will be wiped out all over planet Earth. I wrote at the top of this article, propaganda originating with the United Nations, and that is where it came from, declares that rising sea levels due to rapid global warming will cause dislocation of hundreds of millions of people globally. This flies in the face of evidence of global cooling instead. The article states, rising sea levels are on track to affect about 3 times more people by 2050 than originally thought. So they've raised their estimates, in other words. New research suggests that 300 million homes will be affected by coastal flooding in the next 30 years. And that number could rise to 630 million by the year 2100 if carbon emissions don't decrease. New estimates mean rising seas will cause more damage, cost more money, and impact more communities than ever before. According to a study by Climate Central, published Tuesday in Nature Communications, land housing 300 million people will flood annually by 2050. Additionally, high tides may permanently rise above land that is home to 150 million people. The new number far surpasses the previous estimate of 80 million. Sea level rise is a result of heat-trapping pollution from human activities, which causes ice sheets and glaciers to melt, increasing the volume of water in the oceans. It increases the likelihood of coastal flooding, which can damage infrastructure, destroy crops, and threaten entire cities. Based on human activities, sea levels could rise between 2 and 7 feet during the 21st century, or possibly even more. The majority of people affected live in Asia, with the greatest threats facing mainland China, Bangladesh, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand. In those regions, 54 million more people will be affected than previously thought, bringing the total to 237 million people. In the decades ahead, sea level rise could disrupt economies and trigger humanitarian crises around the world, Climate Central said. Indonesia is already experiencing the effects of increased flooding. The government recently announced plans to move the capital city from Jakarta to Borneo. Jakarta, which sits on the island Java, is the fastest sinking city in the world. I must pause for just a minute. Jakarta is indeed sinking. Islands do that sometimes. They rose up and they can fall down. Sinking has nothing to do with the rise in sea level. Sinking means sinking. Somehow this just escapes the writer of this article, so they threw it in anyway. The article continues. According to a press release, researchers calculated coastal elevation using satellite readings, the standard way to estimate sea level rise. However, they used artificial intelligence to account for known mistakes in previous NASA models, which tended to overestimate elevation. These assessments show the potential of climate change to reshape cities, economies, coastlines, and entire global regions within our lifetime, said Dr. Scott Culp, lead author of the study. As the tide line rises higher than the ground people call home, nations will increasingly confront questions about whether, how much, and how long coastal defenses can protect them. New analysis reveal that about 110 million people already live on land that falls below the current high tide line, compared to the 28 million previously estimated. 250 million people live on land below current annual flood levels, compared to the 65 million previously thought. Well, this article makes wild claims, to be sure. I included a video as well of the CBS This Morning program talking about the report. And of course, everybody comments, oh, what a disaster this will be. If we don't lower CO2 levels in the atmosphere, we are so messed up. Millions of people could die, they say. It would be a tragedy of epic proportions on the face of our planet. Well, the next story throws some cold water on that. And it's interesting just how opposite the stories can be, supposedly using the same science, but they're not. The next story is titled, Massive Sea Ice Growth in Antarctic Portends New Ice Age. That's right, just the opposite. While everybody's looking at the North Pole and saying, oh my gosh, all the ice is melting up there, at the South Pole, sea ice is growing exponentially in ways that haven't been seen in decades. I wrote at the top of this article, climate alarmists and sustainable development zealots will eventually have to face the music of massive ice growth in Antarctica, which in turn may lead to a new ice age that could send planet Earth into the deep freeze. The article states upside-down rivers of warm ocean water may be one of the causes of Antarctica's ice shelves breaking up, leading to a rise in sea levels. But a new study suggests an increase in sea ice may lead to a much more devastating change in Earth's climate, another ice age. Using computer simulations, the research suggests that an increase in sea ice could significantly alter the circulation of the ocean, ultimately leading to a reverse greenhouse effect as carbon dioxide levels in the ocean increase and levels in the air decrease. One key question in the field is still what caused the Earth to periodically cycle in and out of ice ages. University of Chicago professor and the study's co-author, Malte Jansen, said in a statement, "We are pretty confident that the carbon balance between the atmosphere and ocean must have changed, but we don't quite know how or why. The last major ice age ended at the end of the Pleistocene era about 2.5 million years ago, as glaciers have periodically grown and then gotten smaller. Researchers believe that changes to the Earth's orbit may be partly responsible for some of the Earth's cooling, but additional factors have likely played a part," Jensen added. "The most plausible explanation is that there was some change in how carbon was divided between the atmosphere and the ocean," Jansen continued. "There's no shortage of ideas about how this happens, but it's not quite clear how they all fit together." Researchers also believe a mini ice age may have occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. It likely stems from an asteroid impact that rocked the northern hemisphere and led to the Younger Dryas climate event. Jansen pointed out that the southern ocean around Antarctica plays a key role in ocean circulation due to the deep waters in the region, leading it to have outsized consequences. "What it suggests is that it's a feedback loop," said the study's lead author. "As the temperature drops, less carbon is released into the atmosphere, which triggers more cooling. What surprised me is how much of this increased storage can be attributed to physical changes alone, with Antarctic sea ice cover being the key player. Marchuzzi added, noting that future study of the ocean and the role it plays in the carbon cycle can help simulate further environmental change. So the science is diametrically opposed to everything we've heard in the previous article, that sea levels are rising and going to destroy the homes of 300 million people by 2050. But in this case, Antarctic sea ice is growing. This speaks of global cooling, not just global cooling, but an ice age that could come upon us. And of course, weather changes like this never happen overnight anyway. It's not like one day it's 100 degrees and the next day it's 20 below. It just doesn't happen that way. Climate change around the Earth takes a long time to affect. It's like steering a giant ocean liner out in the open seas. A little rudder on the back is what causes the ship to change direction. It may take miles of travel before the ship can even turn 15 degrees to the left or right. So it is with climate change as well. Things happen slowly. Year by year, the weather changes. That's why we have weather people on TV, I think, to tell us how the weather changes. But overall, year to year, decade to decade, century to century, the change in overall weather is very slow. But in this case, as many scientists believe that we're headed toward an ice age instead of towards a global burnout. And lastly, just to add a little bit of insult to injury, the title of the third story is Professor Fired Over Documenting Increases in Polar Bear Populations. This is shocking because climate warming zealots lift up the polar bear as the poster child for disaster, saying that polar bears are on the road to becoming extinct because of global warming. And those cute little polar bears, of course, tug at everybody's heartstrings. My comments on this article are the religion of scientism infects technocrats to substitute pseudoscience for real science and blame everyone else for the results. Polar bears do not face extinction because of man-made global warming, as is claimed by climate hysterical people. And indeed, the whole idea of man-made global warming is ludicrous. It's been disproven and debunked many times by very legitimate scientists and physicists. Man-made global warming is simply a myth. This article states nobody has done more to sink the claim that climate change is endangering polar bears than zoologist Susan Crockford, and she may have paid for it with her job. After 15 years as an adjunct professor, Ms. Crockford said the University of Victoria rejected without explanation in May her renewal application, despite her high profile as a speaker and author stemming from her widely cited research on polar bears and dog domestication. Remember, she is a zoologist. Crockford accused officials at the Canadian University of bowing to outside pressure, the result of her research showing that polar bear populations are stable and even thriving, not plummeting as a result of shrinking Arctic sea ice, defying claims of the climate change movement. And there you have the nutshell of this story. Climate zealots who falsely claim that the polar bear population is decreasing consider Crockford to be a denier. She is denying their pseudoscience. And as such, she deserves to be punished. That was Al Gore's statement, by the way, a few years ago, talking about climate change deniers, that they deserve to be punished. Well, Crockford is being punished. She lost her job because of pressure applied from outside climate change zealots to the university in Canada. And now she's without a job. The article continues, her dismissal, which she announced Wednesday in a post on her Polar Bear Science blog, has spurred alarm over the implications for academic freedom and the rise of the, quote, cancel culture for professors and scientists who challenge climate catastrophe predictions. When push came to shove, University of Victoria threw me under the bus rather than stand up for my academic freedom, said Crockford, who earned a PhD in interdisciplinary studies, specifically biology and anthropology, in 2004. Crockford cited numerous instances of the university promoting her interviews and work, including her participation in a 2007 PBS Nature documentary about dog domestication and evolution, as well as her appearance at K-12 schools and adult groups for 10 years throughout the University of Victoria Speakers Bureau. That support of climate changed 2 years ago. In May 2017, her lectures were shut down after the Speakers Bureau received a complaint about her, quote, lack of balance. The Speakers Bureau incident made it clear the administration had no intention of protecting my academic freedom against complaints from outside the university, Crockford said in an email to the Washington Times. University of Victoria Associate Vice President Michelle Parkin responded with a letter challenging the assertion that Crockford was let go for telling school kids politically incorrect facts about polar bears. She was referring to a recent headline in the National Post of Toronto. There is no evidence to suggest that Dr. Crockford's adjunct appointment was not renewed for telling school kids politically incorrect facts about polar bears, said Ms. Parkin. The University of Victoria, in both word and deed, supports academic freedom and free debate on academic issues. The statement fell short of denying that Crockford's dismissal was linked to her polar bear scholarship, which almost single-handedly blew up the climate change movement's promotion of the bears as iconic victims of anthropogenic global warming. Her books include The Polar Bear Catastrophe That Never Happened, published in February, in which she said the bears were not threatened. She noted that the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's 2015 Red List of Threatened Species puts polar bears' numbers at 22,000 to 31,000, despite a widespread belief that the population has dropped to a few thousand. Well, there you have it. Those legitimate scientists who present evidence in direct contradiction to the global warming hysterical crowd are punished. They're canceled. In this case, her appointment was canceled. They're punished for their presentation of reasoned science. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that scientism is a religion. Those people in society that promote the pseudoscience of climate change, global warming in particular, have no use for other scientists that show a different side. So it's become a political propaganda issue. If you don't agree with them, you will be stopped. If you do agree with them, you'll get grants for new studies, you'll get promotions, you'll get tenure, etc. But don't dare go against their narrative. So Dr. Crockford is paying for her sins, so to speak, by losing her job at the University of Victoria. This battle is not over, I'm sure. Her work is still just as efficacious as it was when it was published, and the facts are clear. She has demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that the polar bears are not nearing extinction any way, shape, or form, and that takes away an important prop from the climate change crowd and also makes them out to be the liars that they are. This really calls them to account. They simply can't have that. So Dr. Crockford is paying a steep price. This is one good reason, by the way, that if you have not read Technocracy Rising yet, or Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order, you need to get a copy and read it. The Technocracy meme is changing the world. The entire planet is under attack. People are calling this change by different names: communism, Marxism, fascism, and a number of other isms, but hardly anybody's getting it right that it's technocracy. We cannot fight an enemy that we cannot properly identify. And until people identify this whole thing as technocracy, they're going to be shadowboxing with the wrong opponent until they're completely overwhelmed. So I encourage you to head over to Amazon.com, look up Technocracy or look up Patrick Wood, and you'll see all of the books available. You'll find on Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order, that there's a Kindle version. There's also an audiobook version. You can listen or read any way that's convenient for you. But I suggest that you get it and read it. There is no substitute for learning. We need to have the ammunition to be able to put away these false arguments and these false narratives that are being promoted by people all over the planet, intent on enslaving humanity into a scientific dictatorship from which it will be virtually impossible to escape from if ever established. I'm Patrick Wood for Technocracy News and Trends. We'll see you next time.